Hi everyone. I thought we'd start by a nice relaxing babble of a brook. Set us in the mood. Hi Natalie, hi Dawn, hi KCM, hi Catherine. How pretty is that? How clean that water is. Hmm. Sorry Leslie, it's not you like me to do 2 tours in a day, but do feel free to have this one on me. Bridget's paddled there, fantastic. Still a beautiful day? Yeah, absolutely. It's actually a little bit of a ford here. I'll show you in a minute, Dawn, when we sort of start the tour proper. Um, it's just such a lovely place to kind of see. It's quite busy. Normally, come down here and it's sort of fairly quiet, but the village is fairly busy, being a very sunny day. Hi, Michelle. So I thought we'd start down here with some peace and quiet before we head into. Hopefully, it'll get a bit quieter as the tour goes on, because obviously we're getting into sort of early evening now. What we are about to coming at 5 o'clock here in UK time. So um, the sun will be starting to kind of come down a little bit. But Trish having a hoagie for a lunch. Ice cream queue. Yeah, I just sort of dodged past and walk into the road to get past the ice cream queue, Bridget. Down by you, as you'll know, probably just around the bend there by the kind of market cross. So lots of folk down there, or there was when I walked past, about half an hour ago. So a lot quieter at this end of the village. So I thought we'd start up here and just start being lulled by just a gentle movement of the water. Go over there and get you some light. I love the dappling light on the water and the movement. It just I find it incredibly calming. Hope you do too. What's a hoagie? I shall let Trist explain that herself. I think I know what it is. It's a form of sandwich, I think, but I shall let Trist fill in on the details. It's a cross-cultural exchange, isn't it? You know, we all learn a bit from each other. Hi, Lethargy. What's happening in Blackpool today? Then is it suitably sunny? I have. I've been beguiled by the spirits of the water. They're luring me in, Susan. I'm powerless to resist it. We could do a lot worse than sit and listen to the movement of the water for an hour, but we're not going to do that. But I think it would be time well spent if we did. So we're coming up on 5 o'clock, so I suspect. Beautiful weather, I'm glad to hear it. Fantastic. I'll be over in Blackpool, gosh, next month now, isn't it? For your fabulous lights. It'll be early November, I'm not quite sure when, but I'll have to fix that up. I'm trying to avoid half term this year because it was so busy on it last year. Okay, so I think we're coming up on time, so let's stand up and have a little bit of me for a minute. Philadelphia sandwich meat and cheese, lettuce, tomato and onion, hard roll moistened with oil and vinegar. Sounds wonderful. That's a hoagie. So thank you, Trist, for aiding our cultural exchange. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Welcome wherever you are. You're joining me here today in the North Yorkshire village of Thornton-le-Dale, often thought of and referred to as one of England's prettiest villages. Certainly one of Yorkshire's prettiest villages, if not maybe Yorkshire's prettiest village, who knows. But there isn't really an official ranking for these. It's all subjective, isn't it? But I think most people would agree that this is pretty special. So we started here, a little tucked away corner of the village. We're on the west end on kind of Malton Gate. We were in Malton a little bit earlier. I'm sure if many of you were on the tour with me in Malton. This is Malton Gate, just in front of us. This little ford. So you have to have a 4x4 vehicle here. For the very simple reason, this is your driveway. If you want to have one of these houses down here, then you have to get your feet wet, because the only way in for a motor vehicle is through the water. Kind of unusual, right? It's a little ford, and you can see we've got a spring. Hello, doggy. That follows the village round a brook, which we'll be picking up at various times on the tour, but I just thought it was such a lovely, peaceful, kind of bucolic setting. It is exactly your own moat. That's quite right. That's definitely kind of how they kind of look and feel. So it kind of dries up here a little bit, and then it continues. So the beck, we can see the famous Beckiel cottage a little bit later on, wrapped its way around the village. A very noisy doggy that is there, wanting to get himself on the live stream. So something sort of positively medieval, isn't there? And almost sort of chateau-esque if we were in France, about having to drive through the water to get to your place. So again, another footbridge. So you can keep your feet dry as a pedestrian, but your car has got to suck it up. So you really wouldn't want a sort of one of these very kind of souped up, dropped vehicles. You're going to want plenty of clearance and a 4x4 to get down there. So hello, Diane Wheatley from Florida, USA. It is so lovely to have you on. So isn't that lovely? What a lovely place. And the property that adjacent to it is not half bad either. And this is a tour, for those that don't know, where the quality of the properties is going to absolutely blow you away. In fact, there's where those dropped vehicles just beat me just now. They are absolutely charming. It kind of regularly kind of referred to, do you know what I mean, as some of the most beautiful village buildings anywhere in Yorkshire. You can see why, particularly in this sunshine. But also the keeping of the gardens with the beck at the front. I think it just provides for us. It's the kind of thing, you know, as a kid, you know, in a fairy tale book, isn't it? That's the kind of cottage that you'd want to live in. There's something about the aesthetic here that comes straight from our kind of fantasies of how we would live in Old England. But of course, Old England is a complete myth made up by the wealthy. There was no Old England where everything was lovely and bucolic. If you didn't have money, it was bloody hard work. So what I want to do is, while we look at this picture book village, and it really is a stunner, is to think about the English village. Because more than towns and cities, England is a nation originally of villagers. And the reason I say that is villages are very much associated with the estates. And if you're on the tour a little bit earlier, we were talking in Malton. The estates of England were largely established over 1,000 years ago. And they were grants of land made to French military officers, barons, given in exchange for military service by William the Conqueror. So he bundled up chunks of land and he handed it out to his supporters. So overnight, areas were kind of created that might once have had a Northumberland overlord, a Viking overlord, were now going to be overseen by a French lord or a Norman lord. And they brought with them their systems of kind of village designation. And so the village becomes the unit of population, of community. A village, for the most part, is self-sufficient. So it has enough people to grow the food, to harvest the food that's needed. It has people that can make things, that can make wheels for carts, that can put shoes on horses, that can make metalwork, make cutting sheaths. So the skills that you would need, you'd expect to find within a village. A wheelwright, a carter, a blacksmith, a miller, all the kind of basic trades you'd expect to find within a village. And this is why I was talking a little bit earlier, actually, about surnames. Why surnames are so... They promise to be dead easy to track your family history. But you can get, if your name here was John Miller, and you were John the Miller. And so you might have down the road Martin Miller in the next village. Doesn't mean you're related, simply that you both do the same task. And so many of our names, Smith meaning general worker, Wright meaning woodworker, Cooper, somebody who makes barrels, Miller, somebody who works in a mill, are associated with trades, and because there was only one person in the village doing that trade, there was never any more. So it didn't matter, you didn't need a surname as such, you needed a descriptor. And so much of our early records of villagers record the first name and the profession, or son of. So Johnson, of course, is son of John. Williamson, son of William. So when we think about surnames in English villages, so often it bears no relation to what's happening in the next village, which is unbelievably confusing. But we do get around it by having some very pretty villages indeed. So just bear that in mind if you're thinking about kind of paying anybody to do work on your family tree. It's very, very easy to pass things off as, oh, we've traced this back. And usually it's utter bunkum, because it is almost impossible unless you're related to the people that either owned the villages, that they were in the church, or conversely, if they were bad uns, if they were wrong uns and got in trouble, you may well find in the court records. But that's very, very difficult. Exactly, so Natalie there, the surname is the village my family lived in. So exactly, how unhelpful is that? It's not really a surname, is it? It's just what happens is that as England sort of moves away from the medieval to what you might call a municipal era, and people need a second name, often they just take the name of where they're from or what they do. So I'm sort of saying this not to be kind of negative anyway. I mean, it's quite fun really, but rather we should never rely on surnames as being an indicator of whether we're likely to relate to somebody or not. So yeah, so let's go back to the idea of the village. So the village is a self-sufficient unit. It's run by a lord of the manor, and he provides accommodation, and in return, the tenants, often who have no choice about living here, they farm his fields, they farm their own fields, but everyone is okay, nobody starves, because at the end of the day, there's really nothing in it for the landholder for his people to starve, because then his fields won't get tended to. It was farmed in a kind of strip pattern, and yeah, who do you think you are? It's an entertainment program, heavily edited as well. It's a good show. And they found in a strip pattern, and often what people would find is that they'd have various strips in different parts of the village. And part of the reason for this was to stop people getting together and forming unions, if you like. Because you'd be forever moving from one plot to another, and your neighbours would be different. This is a blacksmith's cottage, you can see. Beautiful blacksmith's cottage, shown, of course, by the door. We've also got tethering hooks, the local people, yeah, absolutely. And, of course, to give away a stable door. So it's a crook cottage, it's a long cottage, an A-frame cottage. I'll just try and come across this side so you can have a look. So this is the village blacksmith's cottage. And it's what they call a long frame building, typical of English agricultural buildings. Very, very long, with accommodation at one side, and with the animals and so forth at this side, and of course in this trade premises built in as the home of the blacksmith. So by keeping you moving around and not forging close relationships with your neighbours, it prevents you developing, if you like, representation and coming together to ask for more money. But this model that had worked incredibly well for centuries was effectively blown apart by a majorly kind of traumatic event that happened in the 14th century. Not just to England, but all the way across Europe. I'm talking, of course, about the Black Death. And the Black Death, of course, the bubonic plague, as we call it now, ravaged European society. And given any given location, somewhere between 40 and 60% of the population died. And of course, what this meant was there was a tremendous labour shortage. And so coming out suddenly the other side of the Black Death, for the first time, workers had power on their side because there was a scarcity. Crops were rotting in the fields. Orchards were heaving with apples that hadn't been picked. Wine was not being made. Okay? And the wealth and the privilege owed to the Lord of the Manors simply was drying up. And so for the first time, there was created a sense of mobility. Nobody really knew who'd lived or died. So it's a really easy matter to sneak off to the next village. And of course, the next village, who may well have just lost their blacksmith, may well be prepared to pay quite a lot extra. And so this creates this enormous economic boom for the first time, the latter end of the 14th century, for the agricultural and labouring classes to set their own wages. And of course, this horrified the landowners. They'd had it so good for so long. The last thing they wanted was a bunch of empowered labourers basically setting their own hourly and daily rates. It's not that much different now, is it? Those with money, power, in charge of the capital, they like to keep wages under control. They tell us if our wages go up, we're causing inflation. Not the people getting 30 and 40% salary rises in the executive class. No. It's us lot getting 5 or 6%. We're the ones driving inflation. So, yeah, post-COVID, exactly. And that's what I'm talking about. I think it's quite interesting, the parallels, Polly, here, between kind of modern society. So you've got this upset of what had been a very traditional kind of balance tipped away against the workers. And so what's interesting is that one of the responses, that there was soon legislation put in place that stopped workers negotiating. Why wouldn't there be? Hands of who surprised? Nobody. So within sort of 30 or 40 years, they kind of re-established wage controls, but it was never the same again. What happened was the concept of mobility had been introduced into the workforce. The idea you could pick up your tools and move to where the work was. This was completely, at odds with the original estate model, where you're born, grew up, married, had children, worked, lived, and died in the same village, on the same estate, working for the same lord of the manor, or his descendants, of course, over time. So suddenly you've got mobility. And so what happens now is the estates have to think about how are they going to keep their staff. They might have, if you like, put wage controls in, but that doesn't prevent mobility. And so the competition starts. And interestingly, it delivers through property. So what we're looking at here is properties that have been built to attract and retain an agricultural workforce. So all these, why I've been talking about this, these are houses that have been built for the newly mobilised agricultural workforce in order for them to come and work the estates here at Thornton-le-Dale. Kind of nice, right, for agricultural properties. But there was a sting in the tail. Nobody was given permanent work. There was what you call an annual hiring fair, and they were held at Pickering, very, very nearby. And at the hiring fairs, basically, you'd be contracted after being inspected, a bit like we've seen with sort of human markets and slave markets. The farm will be looking at the strength of a guy's back. The farmer's wife thinking how much is he going to take to feed. Looking at the wife, looking at the children, look how healthy they all are. Are we going to get 51 weeks a year out of these people? But if so, they were then taken on, given accommodation for 51 weeks, which meant that every year they had to move. So again, it was just a way of subtly preventing them from kind of digging in and getting comfortable. I just want to sort of pop down here, just to kind of give you a sense of how close we are. Obviously, we're in the village, but how close we are to the agricultural sort of side of the village. I was running in on. Hello there. How are you? My dream was always to have a cottage with a stream running through the garden. It's good until it floods, I think is the answer to that. Then less good. But I started bringing down here. Just, if nothing else, just get out the sunshine, because it really is rather bright today. But very lovely. Such a privilege to come here. So I do hope, if you haven't been here before, this is a lovely surprise of quite how bucolic and attractive this is. So we'll talk about settling in the village and the history in a minute. But I'll just show you. I'm just going to look around this corner. So again, oh, that's nice actually. Have a look at that. Little cascading waterfall over on this side. Hello, Natasha. It's gorgeous here. Yeah, Natalie, very expensive to live here, but you know, are you surprised? Fair convention song about young couple came from hiring fair. Yeah, Bridget. I mean, Fairport absolutely, aren't they? You know, are kind of have always been kind of about English history and incorporating experiences of working people and hiring fairs. We're very much kind of part of that. And as I say, they'll be there sort of feeling the ankles and the muscles and how strong was this person? There's no retirement, no pensions. So often people would dye their hair and rub their hair, to get rid of white hair, try and look younger than they actually were. But we can pan across here, and you can just see how close we are really to the outdoors. Fourth tour today. Oh, fantastic, Leslie. Place you've not been to. So of course people, as I say, they pretend to be. Not that any of us would do that anymore, would we? I don't know. People putting 20-year-old pictures on Tinder. What do they call it? I don't know, because I'm a married man, but and then people being sort of a bit slightly disappointed when they see people in the flesh. Well, of course they couldn't do that, but there was all sorts of tips and tricks to make yourself look actually younger than you were for the hiring fairs, because obviously if you couldn't get hired and you really had no money, then the horrible, horrible reality was you may end up in the workhouse. And the workhouse was not somewhere you wanted to be. That was in fact like a prison for being poor. So people would work very hard, but they had no security. There was no retirement as such. You weren't. If it wasn't like, okay, you've worked for an estate all your life now for some comfortable retirement. It didn't work like that. You had to have children who provide and look after you in your dotage, as they call it. Use that word anymore, dotage. So, but anyway, in your latter years, you'd be expected to have produced sufficient numbers of surviving adult children that would take you in, look after you. But of course, people didn't live long lives, particularly, of course, if they, generally speaking, if they'd been working in agricultural work, because it was bloody hard. So, their bodies would be very kind of worn down, and so you wouldn't have particularly long retirements at this period of time. And of course, even so, retirement, you say that, it's likely that you'd end up working, cooking meals, looking after the children, perhaps mending and so forth. So there's no kind of full retirement in this period because there was no pension, there's no financial support. It was really about what can you do, not what can't you do. So you can't do manual labour. Great, when you can sit and watch children, you can cook, you can make bread, whatever. So everyone had jobs to do all the time. So the village, we think, has been inhabited around this area since the kind of Neolithic Stone Age. The found nearby burial chamber, which dates to about 500 BC. So that can't get by the labor at your age today. Absolutely, Elizabeth. Yeah, a lot of age discrimination around. So about 500 BC, so about 2,500 years old, is the oldest settlement they've found so far. That's not to say that they won't next year find something twice as old as that. That's the beauty of archaeology, isn't it? Is we're always kind of discovering, always finding out. But so far in this area, that's the oldest kind of settlement. And it kind of makes sense, the location of this village, because if you look at it on a map, what you'll find is it sits at the junction between the road that links Malton with Whitby. It's this road we're on now. So this is Old Malton Gate. So back that way is towards York and Malton. This way is towards Whitby. But you've also got the road that links Scarborough with Pickering. So it's a kind of double crossroads. So again, it makes sense. It's as a sort of route stop kind of along the way. And we think that the name of the village by the Thornton-le-Dale was given by Angles, who settled here around 500 AD. So we've heard of Anglo-Saxons, I'm sure. Actually, they're all different tribes. Angles, Saxons, Jutes, as you might say. So but we think it was Angles from kind of northwestern Europe, the beautiful blonde people, the angels, we now think it was like Scandinavian colouring, who settled here and gave it the name Thornton-le-Dale. And we believe the name Thornton comes from an ancient word thun, meaning thorn bushes. So a place where thorn bushes grew. So it's likely that was where the association came. And Thornton-le-Dale, the village, is mentioned in the Domesday Book of 1086. Of course, the Domesday Book is the big survey carried out on behalf of William the Conqueror to basically assess the value of the lands of England. So he could tax them. He knew how much money he was owed and he was due. So it was basically a financial audit of the wealth of England. But it's an unbelievably useful historical resource because it goes into such finite detail, telling us about how cute is that barnyard, look at that, about kind of where people lived, the farm, how much yield was coming off the farm, because obviously it's about taxation levels. So consequently, it is a brilliant resource for historians. And so, we know that there was settlement here in 1086, but it was part of a large settlement known as Thornton. And as I say, the land would have been allocated into small farming strips. And this is what they call the feudal period. You may have heard of feudalism. So feudalism essentially is where people are part of the possessions, the assets, if you like, of an estate. You don't have that freedom of movement. That doesn't come until, as I say, till the Black Death. You're born and allocated a job to do. It's your job to farm the lands, the lord of the manor. It's your job to bring in the harvest. It's your job to work with the other villagers to make it all kind of work. But as I say, it all kind of collapsed after the end of the Black Death. And so, crossing over again, so you get a lovely stretch. Again, we're looking, just give you a lovely sight of the babbling brook. Slightly now better quality. Townhouses are coming into the centre of the village. So the smaller agricultural workers' cottages sort of running out. We're starting to see now slightly grander. So perhaps these are now, as a village move towards civilization. Of course, you need other things, don't you? You're going to need a doctor, probably a notary, somebody who can write things down. There's going to be, of course, people working in the church, who are working kind of the parish, if you like. So the better quality houses, it's likely are allocated professionals who, of course, wouldn't come. They'd come by appointment. They wouldn't come by the hiring fair. So they will get to stay in their properties. They wouldn't get kicked out every year just to keep them on their toes, as you might say. Just get a glass of water. So, again, so have we heard of hiring fairs? I say somebody mentioned there about Bridget about a song about them, but I'm not sure if you'll have heard of this term before. Or indeed, if they kind of used in other countries. I mean, I'll guess so. But it's an awfully kind of brutal way. It's basically like a slave market, really. It's dressed up as the free movement of labour, but in reality, it's anything but, because these people, if they didn't get hired, had nowhere to live and no money to come in. So they weren't in a kind of strong position. And whatever was the daily rate that was being paid, that was the daily rate that was being paid. They were in no position to negotiate. And once they signed that deal, that was the deal for the entirety of that 51 weeks. There was no wage negotiation. Bump a year, tough, That's your lookout. You shouldn't have signed, should you? So it's all non-negotiable. So agriculture really kind of played a central role in the village. It's that kind of yearly cycle, if you think of it, sowing, harvesting, threshing, the breeding and raising of livestock, and that forms the annual calendar. Of course, the other calendar is faith. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But look at this. Isn't this beautiful? I do hope you're enjoying the quality of the accommodation here. If you have to be an agricultural worker in the 18th century, not a bad place to hang up your shovel at the end of the day. It really is. Absolutely. Sort of life. So we're heading into the centre, really, of the village. And this sort of model, really, what we're talking about, the kind of hiring fairs, really held on. If we think that the Black Death did very well and continued, sort of 400 for 400 years, and disrupted it. This next one, this hiring fair model, that's into the First World War. We'll talk about that in a moment and what kind of caused that. But I just want us to just take a few minutes just to really take in now. We're starting to get into the kind of retail of just how gorgeous this place is. It's the florist, the North Yorkshire florist. That first stop on the tour. Formerly the shop of A Hill. I don't know what A Hill did, but today it's the North Yorkshire florist. Looking at houses for sale. Oh, do let us know the prices when they kind of come through. Now then, this time, when I came here the first time, I came in this and I had from this very cafe, I had some fantastic, was it rhubarb or gooseberry ice cream you gave me? You gave me either some gooseberry or some rhubarb ice cream. I remember it being absolutely Well, you remember, I came in and I was live last time I came in. And yeah, fantastic. Sorry to disturb you. So we are live on the internet, so I won't film if you don't want to. So, but we're of course not dead. And so this is the famous Moors delicatessen, and it serves the most. Oh my word! Look at this.
That is the best Italian gelato ever. It's a strawberry sorbet.
Strawberry sorbet.
Yeah.
So here we are. Oh my god. That is. Oh god, that just like burst fruit.
You had rhubarb last time. Nice this time. You're having strawberry.
That is amazing. So just have a look.
Oh, it's a bit empty today.
You had a bike in here last time I was here.
Yeah, it's outside.
Is it? Yeah. So,
maybe the cakes are better.
Eccles cake. We're on the wrong side of the Pennines for Eccles cakes.
Oh, it's lovely.
I know. Really beautiful. Beautiful cakes. Look at those lovely croissants. Is everything made on the premises?
Rebecca, she makes the cakes.
It is.
She's made a fruit cake.
Isn't that beautiful?
Oh, probably going to sell out tomorrow. She's been busy.
So if you're here, if you're passing through, this is a space. Grab some ice cream. Anytime is cupcake time.
They consider this.
And look at this. Oh, Yorkshire Pasty. We're looking at this in Malton. We were in Malton a bit earlier on. So is that made nearby then?
Oh, this coffee's to die for.
Really? Coffee? So Baytown?
Yeah. This is Catherine. She makes it in Malton, just outside. She has a big, it's like it's a big shed.
Yeah.
Massive. And then both her, the sister-in-law, and the family. It's a small family.
Yeah.
But they all make pasta every day.
Fantastic. So
Yeah.
milled with local wheat, I presume?
Yes. Oh, do you want to try some honey?
No, I might get diabetic. I might go over the top with this.
Gosh.
No, I'll be absolutely fine with this. No, but that's.
Too bad with that.
Yeah.
You should have told me.
No, it's quite all right. I'm on a kind of mild level, but that's the bit. I'm going to pass on because I've got a bit more to show them. But thank you so much.
Enjoy it.
Do pop in. Do come and see. No, I'll be absolutely fine. I've got some water in my bag, so thank you so much. So exciting. Here you go. Here you go. That's right. Thank you. You're on YouTube. Thank you very much. So we'll continue on into the village. There we are. Proper Yorkshire hospitality to be found here. And passing the town hall on our left-hand side. And isn't it? Go to Keeper's Cottage. So another, of course, of these things. The gamekeepers. Gamekeepers, of course, played a huge role within the villages. And, gamekeepers, of course, were the ones that protected the Lord of the Manor's hunting stock, the pheasants. Of course, they didn't want the poor people, the poachers, getting hold of them. And so the gamekeepers were put in place to breed the pheasants, the grouse, whatever Lord of the Manor was into hunting down and shooting. Gorgeous ice cream. But again, just have a look at these. Leslie, it's absolutely beautiful. And you come on the bus, Leslie. You come to Whitby, get off here, have a little pootle around, and then you can come. Ronnie, that's what I love doing, nothing more, is chatting to local people on the tours. I'd do every tour like that if I could, but it takes a bit of planning. That was spontaneous, but I just remembered her from last time. So, isn't it nice you could remember us as well? There you go. So again, we see how the beck just folds its way around the village. We'll have a look at the market cross in a minute. Before we do, I'm sure some of you will remember from last time we were here, we've got the amazing chocolate factory. How cute are they, look? You buy your chocolates individually and get a little presentation bag to take them away or give them to your loved one. Isn't that absolutely delightful? Let's see what's on this side. It's closed now, unfortunately. Oh, we've got some local jam here and balsamic bread marmalade. So some savouries and some also nice smelly things, as I would say, in the nice possible word. But the smelly things you ladies like lotions and potions and things that you put around yourself. So let's go and have a look then at the village square. So by the market cross. So of course the market's another central feature of life in the village. Place to come and buy and sell, but also a place of justice. It's where, of course, you would find the stocks. And the stocks formed, I'm trying to find a way, a very important part of historic justice. So the stocks were there as partly punishment and partly shaming. So these days we have internet shaming, don't we? In the old days, the shaming that went on was done by locking people up in public, sometimes before being whipped or some other punishment, but often it was the punishment itself, being shown in front of your peers to have transgressed. And of course, people would hear verbal abuse. They may throw rotten vegetables at people. So it was a way of demonstrating the kind of societal disapproval, shall we say, of a lovely sign that, like, the best kept village trophy for Rural Community Council. A lovely award. So the stocks, as we see here, sit down with your ankles through the stocks, sitting on the market cross. Socks are very important. No, the stocks. So you'd sit there below the market cross here, originally dated from the 13th century, designated the right to hold a market here. And this would be the place of punishment. So yeah, it was a really important element to have people feel that they were, being judged for what they'd done. You didn't get away kind of scot-free. So very good. Well, just part why this will then is just part of the kind of history really of the village, and this is how it was part of village life really. This was sort of part of the ebbs and flows, and often it was fairly trivial things people would be done for. It might be getting drunk. It could be fighting, or it could be petty thievery. It wasn't necessarily particularly terrible things, sort of transgressions more than anything. But it was a sight of justice being done. So everyone could have a good tut and shake their head, if you like, do you know what I mean, at people of how awful they are. So as I was saying earlier, the kind of the model of settlement kind of lasted up until really the First World War. And this is again annual life with the hiring fairs. And people in these communities were remarkably kind of self-sufficient. And this was kind of based on the huge availability of labour. After the war, after the First World War, this became neither acceptable nor available. Labour was still cheap. It was less plentiful. For a couple of reasons. Firstly, of course, many had gone off to the war and simply not come back. On how many tours have we looked at lists of names of men that went and didn't return? Well, of course, filling their roles in small villages is kind of difficult. It's not easy just to find new labour, particularly when every village has suffered from a loss of labour because of the war dead. So that was the first thing. But also, around this time, you've got the emergence of emigration as a serious possibility for people. In the 1920s and the 1930s, coming down to the centre of the village, it'd be very likely that you'd be presented with adverts for cheap passage to Canada, to Australia, to South Africa, to the New World, where a man and his family could start anew. That they wouldn't be bound by the social ties. They could earn more money, they could have more land. Now, how truthful these adverts were in practice is going to differ considerably, but they had a very, very significant drag. So as with here, staff wanted, this becomes harder and harder for people to recruit and retain the agricultural workforce. So what you might say is a jolly good thing is that it ends the process of the hiring fairs and the 51 weeks. If you've got good staff, you're not going to get rid of them. You're not going to send them on their way just to make them insecure if you can't then find replacements for them. So it's kind of interesting that two massive events of huge, loss of life and trauma, both the Black Death and the First World War, the Great War, the 1914-1918 war, are what drive huge social change that impacts on the day-to-day lives of the agricultural poor, the working class, however you want to kind of describe or define them. I find that kind of really interesting, and that's how history is. We often think about history as kind of get taught as kings and queens. There's no such thing. Basically, periods continue until something happens and changes. COVID is one of those. Wars are one of those. Earthquakes are one of those. Okay? Probably climate change is one of those in certain communities. So we bobble along, doing what we do. We like things not to change, but then suddenly we have these seismic events that force a change. Then things begin to bed down, and then we get a new normal, and thus it continues onwards. And that really is kind of history, isn't it? Is kind of the periods in between the major shocks. So we're coming now into the area that is known for Lady Lumley's. And this is Lady Lumley's cottages. It's a beautiful row. It starts, this isn't the first one. The first one's there, you can see with the mullion windows. They are 12 cottages that were provided by Lady Lumley, who was a rich lady. I'll tell you about it in a minute. And they provided for ladies of the village. Really beautifully built. This row, 12 properties, still functioning, built very, very well. And they were built in 1670. So, Lady Lumley was Viscountess Lumley, established a deed of trust in 1657, laying up the terms to build the almshouses. And the almshouses were to provide accommodation for 12 poor people. And at the centre of this terrace, we've got a plaque commemorating the family. Oh, it's there. I knew there was one over here somewhere. People died. Yeah, absolutely. Are they almshouses? Absolutely, they're almshouses. So we've got here a plaque about the almshouses here. So these almshouses were founded by Lady Lumley in 1656, being further endowed by Gerard Wolfenden Hasselmore in memory of his ancestors, Ralph Hassel of Emmanuel College, Cambridge, and of this parish, and William Moore also. So Lady Lumley's almshouse from 1656. And next to it is the schoolhouse, which was also built by Phillips. So Lady Lumley was what we would now call a philanthropist. She put money into the village to improve the standard of life of people who are falling below the cracks, to poor people get housing, but she also wanted to lift people up and out of the village. This is another way, of course, that people end up leaving the village, quite interestingly, ultimately, is through education. That's another way out, isn't it, that really only comes, into the latter part of the last century, or 19th century, and the early part of the kind of 20th century. You suddenly start to get education being away. It was quite rare, but Lady Lumley was very keen on this, and so she'd been born as Elizabeth Sandys and married Richard, the first Viscount Lumley, and the couple had no children. So in 1657, she provided money directly to the village to erect the school here to help poor local parents educate their children. It was to be a place of schooling, of prayer reading for the children of Thornton-le-Dale and the nearby parish of Sillington. So Lady Lumley also left £10 per year to support 5 students into Oxford University, another 5 into Cambridge University, to give them top-class opportunities. And one of the first pupils of this school was John Leng, who graduated with a bachelor's degree from Cambridge in 1686. So during the lifetime of Lady Lumley, she was able to see the impact of the change in the investment that she was making. And of course, that charity continues to this day, operating the almshouses. So it's got a remarkable sort of testament. The school fell out of use in the early sort of 20th century, but it's been used since as a village hall. So it's still got a kind of core purpose and sort of used frequently. So Lady Lumley died in 1657, aged 80. So she had a very good innings. And today it's run by the Lady Lumley's Charitable Trust, and she's commemorated in the Lady Lumley School at nearby Pickering. So before we go and see this famous site of them all in this village, we're going to have a quick look at what remains of the manor house. And going back to, we talked about the sort of Norman conquest. What we know about this village is that prior to the Norman conquest and prior to the Domesday Book, that this was the lands of Morcar, Earl of Northumberland, who famously was one of the combatants of the Battle of Stamford Bridge. He had a residence here. And by 1281, a manor house has been built here, which we're now looking at a sort of more modern version of, signifying he's a permanent resident of an overlord of an independent parish. And in 1661, the owners, the Hill family, built a new manor on the site of the old one. That's what we're going to look at now. So the hall is now used as a residential care home. So I want to be obviously a bit careful as to how I film. But nonetheless, it is rather splendid indeed. And there is both a wonderful stable block incorporating an antique centre over on the left-hand side, and a pretty darn magnificent old hall over on the left-hand side, sorry, right-hand side. But again, I don't want to go near the windows because obviously it's a residential care home, and that would be inappropriate and invasive. What a lovely spot. So this is the village manor, and so at the heart of the English village, you've always got what they'd call the big house, the mansion house, the place where the lord of the manor and his family, but also his servants, his domestic staff, would live. Because, of course, on these estates, there was a great deal needed to be done, from gardening, looking after the animals that might farm, obviously cleaning, indoor work, cooks, handymen, butlers, etc. So, there was a lot of employment created by the big houses. And so this is now the kind of modern version of the manor house of Thornton-le-Dale. We're going to cross back over the beck, have a look at it from this side, before we go and see one of the most famous sites anywhere, certainly in Yorkshire, quite possibly in England too, the famous Beck Eel cottage. So this is Thornton Beck, the water that we've been looking at. It's been following us around. We could have walked through the village. It's kind of been following us, so we've never really been too far from kind of Thornton Beck. It starts up on the North Yorkshire Moors. I'll step over here and try to fall over. Take you down and have a look at the beck here. And it runs down through the village before it joins the River Derwent. So the river, if you're on earlier, we saw running through Malton. This runs right into the River Derwent. So let's now sort of cross back over and give you the view that everybody comes in. And thankfully, I'm delighted to say now that it is a good deal quieter than I was here when I arrived about 3:30. It's very busy. It's quieting right off. That's great. So we can see now. So continues the beck on this side. And it's quite wide here. But yes, a lovely place to retire to, wouldn't it? But it's very shallow. It's only really a few inches deep. So it looks like it's kind of a major water source, but it's not. And of course, this pathway takes us to one of the most famous views anywhere in the county. It is a view that has graced 1,000 chocolate boxes, tea towels, jigsaws, posters, postcards, you name it. If anybody is looking to capture an image of pastoral, bucolic England, I can guarantee the Bell Eel Cottage will have been featured in amongst it. It is frequently spoken of as the most beautiful house in England. Everything about it, the beautiful proportion, quality, the thatch is sublime. The gardens, the upkeep, the position. Let me just pan across and you'll see by the water across the weeping willows of quite how peaceful it is here. The bridge behind us. I think you can see why people just melt when they see Bell Eel Cottage. Thatched porch, absolutely. And look at the roof line as well. Look at the decorative. Let me just go in a little bit of zoom. The work that's been done on the roof. So it's not just a case of it being thatched. It's thatched with serious design. Absolutely. So a thatched roof, those that know, of course, is a straw roof. So over time, the thatch turns a darker colour. But isn't that absolutely sublime? So that is Belle Cottage. So even in this village of beautiful places, this stands out. Obviously set back from the main street by the beck. It's known simply as a kind of thatched cottage, and it's built in the 17th century. So it's what they call a crook-framed cottage, which is the shape like an A-frame with a long bar going right the way through it, so kind of supported and kind of held together. And it's considered to be one of the finest buildings in Yorkshire. As I say, you name it. Calendars, postcards, biscuit tins, it appears on there. It's one of those photographed houses anywhere in Britain. And of course, we hardly can sort of bring ourselves to leave because you're so kind of drawn in to look at Thomas Kincaid-esque. And the flowers, of course, perfect. So his name is The Thatched Cottage. Belle Isle, KCM, I-L-I-S-L-E, Isle, like Belle Isle. Belle Isle Cottage. Everything about it so beautifully tended. We really got to drink in. It's absolutely beautiful. I sat on the wall trying to sketch one Sunday morning. So Catherine has been here with her sketchbook. Let's try and deal with the sun. So that might give us a nice kind of vista if the sun behaves itself. So Catherine, you'll know quite how peaceful it is. This setting here is a kind of second to none, really. If we just come and pan in on the water, you can see firstly, hopefully how shallow it is, but also how clear it is. This water coming down from the moors is beautiful. And it's at Becky Hill Cottage. That's absolutely right, Cindy. That's 100% what it's called. It is so clean, so pure. One hopes there's no sewage sort of going into it. It is an absolute joy. But of course, it's far from the only lovely building along here. There are time for a paddle on a hot day. Absolutely. I mean, there are folk doing that. I don't want to put them on camera, but absolutely, you're always going to see families. It's a great spot. A little weir created over here, a little bit of movement on the water. It keeps a bit of interest going for it. It's not driving a watermill or anything, but it creates a lovely noise. Perfection it is, Arlen. It is absolutely English perfection. Those that are Anglophiles, I think that this is the sort of property, I'm sure, that will absolutely push your buttons. You don't mind that kind of crudity of that term. You know, it's just got everything that we associate with the classic pastoral, nature-based England in one kind of perfect sort of wrapping. And it's not just the property, of course, it is the location altogether. Just found this tour. Marlene, we've just passed it. I'm going to go one time back for Marlene because I can't believe she's just joined the tour. And this Marlene did claim this house. So by all, by everything that is good and true, let's give her the opportunity to inspect her property. Make sure the good folk of Yorkshire have been looking after it in her absence. Bit of an absent landlord, I'm afraid, Marlene. You need to stop by more often, do property maintenance. But as it is, they have been looking after it for you. And it is looking mighty fine. So one last roll pass. The sun's in the wrong position, so it'll come from the other end. And for those who want to see it again anyway, it's no great hardship, is it? So for Marlene's benefit and for everybody else, the wonderful, the fabulous, the incomparable, one and only, Becky Hill Cottage, Thornton-le-Dale. So let's have a kind of walk on, coming up towards the end of the tour. I want to take us up into the church, it's appropriate on a Sunday to finish up by the church. The mill, by the way, is behind us. I want to take us down to the mill because it's nice down there, but unfortunately the 4G gets very jumpy, so I don't really want to jeopardise your enjoyment by having your 5 minutes of buffering to kind of show you a building. But basically, of course, the mill was another really, really important element of village life. You know, once you've done your harvest, you've got your grain, you want to turn that grain into flour, don't you? We were talking in Malton earlier, if you remember, about Yorkshire puddings and how poor people really would use just pure wheat flour for food because you could sell it for a higher price. So you'd sell your wheat grain and you'd use your rye and your bran and your barley to make your bread. So that's why Yorkshire puddings can only really be done in rich houses because the flour was simply too heavy and too dense. But you wouldn't keep your own, wheat because you could sell it at a much higher price. So consequently, everybody sold their wheat. So that's why. In case you wondered earlier why we were talking about Yorkshire puddings, you couldn't do them with other flours. It was because the value of that grain was so much higher that you'd sell that and you'd keep the cheap ones for yourself, because that's what would keep you in food over winter. So the beck sort of follows us round. Does the stream flood the houses? It can flood a bit, but it's not so dramatically that it would flood the houses. But it has sort of come up on occasion. But it's not an area notorious for flooding. Isn't it beautiful? So the mill is down the bottom of this, about sort of 2 or 3 minutes, kind of walk away, but a little bit too far for the purposes of today. But as we're here and we are on a bridge, I know the 2 words are screaming out to you. They will be, if you've been on my tours before. You will know that those 2 words are poo and sticks. It's time, ladies and gentlemen. It's time. We have a red, we have a brown. It's time. You runners and riders, on your left, the red stick, on your right, the brown stick. It's time to decide. Is it going to be red? Is it going to be brown? Is it going to be red? Is it going to be brown? Is it going to be red? Is it going to be brown? You've got to decide. You've got 5 more seconds to decide. You're going red, you're going brown. You're going red, you're going brown. So you'll see we've got red is on the left-hand side, brown on the right-hand side, and 3, 2, 1, go. And it is red by a long way, by about 3 lengths. Did you see that? That was remarkable. Red absolutely walked that race. So if you had red, patty on the backy, if you had brown, hang your head in shame, you are unfortunately a loser until the next round of poohsticks. The next time we're on a tour with a bridge, pray that this is going to be your time. You're going to show them you're not a loser, you're a winner. I need to take this defeat, take it deep, earn that hurt, make it feel, right? And next time, you're going to pick the winner. Next time, you are going to be red. Get some chocolate now. Nice little bit, absolutely. Poohsticks is just one of those things, isn't it? And for those who don't know about it, Poohsticks is Winnie the Pooh. It's the thing that him and Piglet do. And Piglet and Pooh, it's like an evocation of childhood, of endless time to spend. And they don't have really money or stuff to do. So it's constantly looking for little pleasures. And Poohsticks is what I would just call part of the little pleasures of life. Just something that is just to while away an afternoon. My sister and I would have endless rounds because no matter how many times you'd win or lose, there could be another round of poohsticks, you see. So ultimate bragging rights by the end of the day. Maybe you might have won 27, 24. But, you'll eventually emerge the winner. And of course, if you're behind, you keep insisting on further rounds of it. But, sibling rivalry aside, it is, I think, a fun thing to do. Honestly, definitely, I'm on a tour. So I hope you enjoyed that if you're not coming from me. So we're coming up now into the Church of All Saints. And of course, we've talked about, I feel like, the biorhythms, haven't we, of the year in the English village. And that, of course, that was driven by, to a huge degree, agriculture, hiring firm fairs, by, of course, the harvest, by planting, sowing, tilling, etc. More cottages over here. But of course, the other thing that that drove the life of village is that of the faith of Christianity. But in many respects, of course, the agricultural calendar and the Christian calendar aren't so wildly separate, are they? Of course, famously, we have the harvest festival, giving thanks. The harvest, September time, very important. Oftentimes now, kind of donation, charity stuff, isn't it? But of course, Easter, period of growth, associated rebirth, growth. There seems to be quite a sort of pull, doesn't there, between the year of faith, the idea of creation, of God, of rebirth, of continuity, and the agricultural year and landscape. And of course, praying for a harvest. You weren't meant to do that as a Christian. But it's one of the oldest forms, isn't it, of... there's blackcurrants on there. Are they blackcurrant, not blackcurrants, elderberries, are they? I forget which, but they're absolutely lovely. So, you know, it's kind of very, very important, that synergy between faith and farming. It goes back all the way through kind of human history. And it brings us into the church. A lovely church here. So interesting kind of story of this church, because it ended up being having three patrons, which is unusual. Normally in the village, there is only kind of one family that controls it. In this, there was three that laid a claim to it, which meant it was a terribly difficult job for the pastor, who in effect had three paymasters. Satisfying, none of them got on, none of them agreed, and so there's a kind of quite a high turnover of priests here. Whenever they could, they'd disappear off, because it was rather kind of stressful. But the last story that I want to share with you today is a story about somebody else who got away. So we've kind of talked, haven't we, about not escape, but sort of that idea of mobility being a kind of motif, isn't it? That it was Black Death created mobility, the war created scarcity. So actually, through these things that disrupted this model of being born, living, growing up, marrying, having children, aging, dying in the same place, which is why, of course, when we look at these gravestones, we see so many the names of the same families. But there was another way to get away, and that was to join the army. And there's a grave we're going to look at in a moment of a soldier called Matthew Grimes, who was born into an agricultural family. He wasn't born into means. His family had no real kind of wealth to speak of. He decided, though, that he didn't want a life of agricultural labour, living and working in the village. He wanted, instead, a life of adventure. And that's not to say that the life in the army would be easy. Of course, it was incredibly tough. But he joined up into the British Army, and he served in what they call the Peninsular Wars. And these are the wars, Spain, Portugal, against Napoleon's forces. So essentially, they were the empire battles between the British and the French for control of Europe. And Matthew Grimes did well for himself, but he wasn't promoted terribly highly. He was a good, solid soldier, and he was trusted. And so, when eventually Napoleon was captured, and he was taken to first Elba, where he escaped from, then St. Helena, Matthew Grimes was one of his guards. He was a trusted soldier. And what's interesting is that Napoleon was treated as an important prisoner. He wasn't humbled. He wasn't thrown in. He was really under house arrest, for a better name. But he was not in particularly good health. And Matthew Grimes, in effect, became his manservant and looked after him well. And Napoleon became so attached to this lad from Thornton-le-Dale that he decided he wanted him to attend to him at his funeral. And so Matthew Grimes became one of the coffin bearers. And one of the last jobs that Napoleon did before he died is he wrote a letter to the family of Matthew Grimes to congratulate them on the man he'd become, the graciousness with which he'd looked after him, the service that he'd given him, and that in effect, this lad who was born and really should have been an agricultural labourer in Thornton-le-Dale instead became the jailer, confidant and friend of Napoleon Bonaparte. And we see here that actually Matthew Grimes didn't die until 1875. He was aged 96. Incredibly long life. The old soldier who served in the 20th and 24th Infantry in India, the Peninsular Wars, a guard at St. Helena over Napoleon, and a bearer to the monarch to his grave. Monument erected by the friends of the old veteran. So isn't that a lovely and incredible story of someone who got away, that wasn't trap that wasn't conditioned and forced into being into the life that his family, if you like, he created inadvertently through the strict social constructs of English village society. And he went on to play a part in world history. And here he is back buried in the village. So I think that's a kind of nice way to finish our tour today in Thornton-le-Dale. We've hit our hour mark. And I think that he did find eventually. And I think it just goes to show that, you know, as much as you try and put, if you like, strictures on people, if people can break out, who knows what they're capable of? Who knows what adventures lie around the corner? But I do know that at Lancashire Fusiliers, thank you, I do know that you'll have other adventures with other guides. So I'm not going to outstay my welcome. I've been on here, obviously, second tour today, so my throat is a bit ragged. So thank you so much, everybody who has joined me. I do hope you've enjoyed today. If you weren't on in Malton earlier, that tour will be up on YouTube. So do go and have a look at that and enjoy Malton. It was certainly a great tour. I enjoyed it. But Thornton-le-Dale, wow, what a place, a special, special place in my heart. And I know it's a place you guys have become very fond of as well. So it's been lovely to be back. Lovely to see so many of you on the tour. And the sun is kind of coming in now. So I'll just kind of walk us down past the church one more time. And we'll say our goodbyes. I've really, really enjoyed this tour. Absolutely. Oh, hi, Kathy. Didn't even you're on. But I think you probably hear my throat is getting a bit raggy. 2 tours a day. Some of the other guys are very good at doing 2 tours a day. I rarely do it, so I'm not really match fit for doing 2 tours a day. Thank you, KCM. I do appreciate it. I never take this for granted. I always enjoy it. So thank you so much, everybody. And I will see you again very, very soon.